In 1914, the world was on fire. But for the Muslim world, there was still something that held everything together. One empire, one Caliph, one voice that connected believers from Istanbul to Mecca, from Baghdad to Jerusalem, from Cairo to the mountains of Central Asia. For 600 years, it had stood. Not because it was perfect, not because it had never been challenged, but because it was one. And in a world of empires competing for land, resources, and power, that unity was the most dangerous thing on earth. To understand what happened next, we have to go back to the moment the trap was set. Part 1. The Empire at War. In 1914, the Ottoman Empire made a decision that would seal its fate. It entered the First World War on the side of Germany. This was not simply a military alliance. It was a declaration that would shake the foundations of the Muslim world. Because the Ottoman Sultan was not just a political leader, he was the Caliph, the spiritual successor to the Prophet's leadership. And as Caliph, he issued a call for jihad, against Britain, against France, against Russia. 300 million Muslims lived under British colonial rule in India, in Egypt, in West Africa, in Malaya, and every single one of them heard that call. Britain had a problem unlike any it had faced before. Not a military problem, a spiritual one. How do you fight an empire when its leader speaks in the name of God? The answer they found was not on any battlefield. It was in a letter. Part 2. The Promise. In the summer of 1915, a British official in Cairo sat down and wrote a letter addressed to one man, Hussein ibn Ali, the Sharif of Mecca, the guardian of Islam's two holiest cities, a man whose word carried weight across the Arab world. Britain offered him everything: an independent Arab state, stretching from Arabia to Syria, from Iraq to Palestine. Freedom, unity, a nation built by Arabs, for Arabs, and governed by Arabs alone. The letter was clear, or at least, it appeared to be. In exchange for this promise, Britain asked for one thing: lead a revolt against the Ottoman Caliph, raise the Arab flag against Istanbul, divide the Muslim world from within. Hussein was not a naive man. He had questions, he had conditions, he negotiated, but in the end, he believed them. And in June 1916, the Arab revolt began. Arab soldiers took up arms against their fellow Muslims, against the Caliph, for a promise made by a foreign empire. That promise was already dead before the first shot was fired. Part 3. The room where the betrayal was signed while Arab blood was spilling into the desert sand. While Arab soldiers were dying for Britain's word, two men were sitting in a room in London, one British, one French, and between them, a map of lands they did not own, lands they had never walked, lands whose people had not been asked. In May 1916, the same month the Arab revolt gained momentum. Mark Sykes and François-Georges Picot signed a secret agreement, the Sykes-Picot Agreement. It divided the Arab world between Britain and France. Every land Britain had promised to the Arabs was already colored in red and blue, red for Britain, blue for France. Not for the Arabs, never for the Arabs. The men who died in the desert that summer died for a map they were never meant to see. Part 4. The Third Promise. And still, it was not over. On November 2nd, 1917, Britain made a third promise to a third party about the same land. British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour wrote a letter. To Lord Rothschild, a prominent British Zionist. One paragraph, 67 words. That would change the fate of Palestine forever. Britain declared its support for the establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine, the same Palestine it had promised to the Arabs just 2 years earlier. 3 promises, 1 land, and not one of them was ever meant to be fulfilled. At least not for the Arabs. Think about what happened in just 3 years. 1915. Britain promises the Arabs an independent state, including Palestine. 1916. Britain secretly agrees with France to divide that same land between themselves. 1917. Britain promises Palestine to a third party entirely. 3 contradictory promises, made by the same government, to 3 different parties, about the same piece of land. This was not confusion. This was not poor planning. This was a strategy. And it worked. Part 5. The Fall of the Caliphate. By 1918,
against
the war was
all
over.
odds, he built
The
a new
Ottoman
beginning
Empire
in the
had
West,
lost.
a land
The
of
Arab
knowledge,
revolt had served its
strength,
purpose.
and faith.
Britain and France
Cordoba
moved in to
rose
collect
as a
what they had
beacon of
always intended
civilization.
to take. The lands were divided as planned. Iraq went to Britain. Syria and Lebanon went to France. Palestine went under British control. And the Arabs. The Arabs who had fought and died for a promise of independence were given nothing. Hussein ibn Ali, the man who had started the revolt, died in exile, betrayed by the empire he had trusted. But the story did not end there. Inside what remained of the Ottoman Empire, a new force was rising, a general who had won on the battlefield when others had lost, a man who had decided that the old world was finished, and that a new world must be built on entirely different foundations. His name was Mustafa Kemal, and he had no use for a caliph. He saw the caliphate not as a source of strength, but as an obstacle, a link to a past that he wanted to erase. He was not alone in this thinking. There were forces, inside and outside the Muslim world, who had been waiting for exactly this moment. On March 3, 1924, the Grand National Assembly of Turkey voted. The Caliphate was abolished. Abdulmajid II, the last caliph of the Muslim world, was given hours to leave. He packed a suitcase. He was driven to a train station in the middle of the night, and he left. 1,400 years of Islamic leadership ended, not in battle, not with honor, not with a ceremony or a farewell, with a vote, in a room, by men who had already decided. Part 6. The map that replaced a civilization. What followed was a reordering of the world. New borders appeared where there had been none. Iraq, Syria, Jordan, Palestine, Lebanon, countries invented by strangers, for strangers. Lines drawn in London and Paris by men who had never set foot in the lands they were dividing. Men who did not speak the languages. Men who did not know the tribes. Men who did not care about the history. They drew their lines, and then they installed rulers. Not rulers chosen by the people. Rulers chosen by London and Paris. Men who would protect British and French interests. Not Muslim interests, not Arab interests, not the interests of the millions who lived within those arbitrary lines. And with the Caliphate gone, there was no longer a unifying voice, no longer a symbol that said to the Muslim world, "We are one." Instead, there were kingdoms and republics and mandates and protectorates, each one separate, each one weak on its own, each one dependent on the very powers that had created it. Part 7. The Question. In 10 years. Between 1914 and 1924, Britain had done what no army had achieved in 14 centuries. It had not conquered the Muslim world. It had convinced the Muslim world to conquer itself. The Arab revolt did not free the Arabs. It broke the Caliphate from within. The promises were not diplomacy. They were weapons, and they worked perfectly. By 1924, the Muslim world had gone from one unified caliphate to over a dozen fragmented states, each one bordered by lines drawn by others, each one led by rulers answerable to others, each one cut off from the others by design. And the consequences of those 10 years we are still living today. Every conflict in the Middle East, every border dispute, every foreign military base on Muslim land, every puppet government answering to Washington or London instead of its own people, every one of them has a root. And that root was planted between 1914 and 1924. They did not just divide the land. They divided the Ummah. And until the Ummah understands what was done, how it was done, and who did it, the divisions will remain. This is not ancient history. This is the story of the world we live in today, and it begins right here. Next, Episode 2, The Illusion of Independence. 1930 to 1958, the moment the Muslim world thought it was finally free, and why it wasn't.